Helen Maston is also an organizing member of our chapter who inspired us with the sharing of stories about her fourth great-grandmother 4 years ago at a chapter meeting. That evolved into a program on founding mothers for Constitution Week 2 years ago. So she has had a wonderful impact on helping us to honor our patriots, and we are tremendously grateful to her for getting us started. And like Renee and Talana, Helen found that both of her fourth great-grandparents adamantly supported the cause for independence during the Revolution. And from these great-grandparents, Helen acquired that spirit of defending this country's independence. You will recognize in her that good-hearted, feisty spirit that runs in her veins. She truly comes by it naturally. So please welcome from Pima, Helen Maston. There you are.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I've never been accused of being very quiet, but I guess I will use this today. Thank you all for coming. We have quite a crowd here tonight. I don't know if any of you were here a couple of years ago when I did my fourth great-grandmother, Dicey, Langston, Springfield. And I have given the talk about her at different events and occasions, but I decided this year that I would talk a little bit about her husband, Thomas Springfield. And my sons and my grandsons think that that somehow, if we haven't been able to prove it, but somehow one of either him or his brother or some relative of his invented the Springfield rifle. And that's what they like to think about. I'm not sure that that's even true. But if they want to think that, that's fine. That's fine with me. Today I'm going to tell you a bit about my fourth great-grandparents, Thomas H. Springfield Jr. and his wife, Dicey Langston Springfield. These grandparents are on my paternal side, on my father's mother's side. And I always have to give credit to my niece, Sonia Kumler, for finding Dicey, because we had no idea that she even existed. And she got a genealogy bug a few years ago and found her and joined DAR as a member at large. And so it was very easy for me then to become a member just by showing my relationship to her. Thomas Springfield Jr. was born on the 15th of July in 1766 in Butte County, North Carolina. My sister-in-law, my brother's wife, my older brother's wife, is a native, about a fourth or fifth generation native of North Carolina. So I called her and I said, how do you pronounce B-U-T-E? Because I wasn't sure. She says, that's not a county. There's 100 counties in North Carolina. She knows them all. So I said, well, no, it's not now, because it was formed in 1764, but they abolished it in 1779. She says, give me a few minutes, I'll call you back. So she called me back, and she said, guess what? Butte County belonged to John Stewart, who was an Englishman. He was the first Earl of Butte. And the king had given him some land in North Carolina for being such a good guy, I guess, I don't know. But he's the one that instituted the Stamp Act, and if any of you know of your history, That wasn't a very popular tax, the Stamp Act, where they had to put a stamp on everything. And so during the war, I mean, you'll notice that the county was abolished in 1779. Well, the war was still happening. Well, John Stuart fled to England because the Patriots were making it pretty hot and heavy for him, and so he decided that if he wanted to live, he better go home. And North Carolina took the county, divided it into two counties, Warren County on the north and Franklin County on the south. My maiden name is Warren, and there's a lot of Warrens in North Carolina, in the northern part of North Carolina. So, okay. Thomas, we'll go back to Thomas. His mom and dad were, okay, let me find this. He was the son of Thomas H. Springfield Sr. and Martha Upham, U-P-H-A-M, Springfield. His mother passed away sometime in 1768, and shortly after that, his father was a school teacher. Maybe that's where we get it from, I don't know. But anyway, his father committed suicide. He hung himself. He just fell into a very deep depression. Thomas was only 2 years old. We found out that all four children, Aaron, Elizabeth, Moses, and Thomas, were given to other people. Aaron was 8 years old, the oldest, and he was given to a family and was to learn the trade of a blacksmith until he became 21. Elizabeth was 6 years old, and all we know about her is that she lived with that family until she was 18, and she never married. Thomas's brother Moses was 4 years old at the time, and he was given to a different family, so they were all split up. And Moses was to learn to read and write and to learn the trade of a cooper. And so it's Moses that my sons and grandsons think that probably became a gunsmith because of, or it could have been Aaron too. So, anyway, good guess. Anyway, your guess is as good as mine. But Thomas, there's no information about what happened to him. He was only 2, and we have no, to this date. I'm sure there's more research we could do. But as of now, we really don't know what happened to Thomas. We do know, when we find him again, in any documentation, he's a member of the South Carolina militia, and he has been elected as to the rank of captain. Now we think as how you get ranks in the service today, that's not the way it was back then, according to my brother, who is a retired Army colonel, and he let me know that you were elected by your men. Leaders were elected by their men to be over them. So then this was in the back country of South Carolina in the Lawrence district, where Dicey happened to live. And it was pretty wild. And you remember now that Thomas was born in 1766. He was only 10 in 1776. So he probably joined the militia at the age of maybe 12, 13, maybe 14 at the oldest. Very young man, but back then, boys grew up fast, and so did girls. So, because there was a lot of responsibility, a lot of things to do. Then Thomas meets Dicey. It's hard for me to say. Her name is Laodicea, but nobody ever called her that. In fact, my genealogy comes through her daughter named Laodicea, who has a daughter named Laodicea, who finally has a daughter named Emma, who finally has a daughter named Ella.
Thank God. Nice.
So, they get away from that. But I just call them Dicey 1, 2, and 3 because it's just easier. But Thomas is sent by, for a long time I thought that Thomas was James Langston, who was Dicey's brother, was a friend. But James was not allowed to go to his home, and he had left a rifle at Dicey's house. And he told Dicey that he would send somebody for it when he needed it, and they would give a password, and she was to give them the rifle. She said, okay. Well, James had sent word to another platoon to send somebody, and this here was the code word, and his sister would give them the rifle because they needed them. And so Thomas went to the house. Him and another guy another soldier went to the house, and Dicey let him in because they mentioned that her brother James had sent them. So she let him in, and she said, and they told her that she had come for the rifle, and so she hurried upstairs and got the rifle. But when she was upstairs, she remembered she hadn't asked for the code word. Oh, what am I going to do? So she said, okay. So she went back down with the rifle, and he said, oh, good, you got it. That's just perfect. That's what we need. And he said, I'll take it now. And she said, I think not. And she raised it right to his face and said, what's the code word? And he said, what do you mean? And she said, well, if there's no code word, I'm gonna blow your head off. So then he told her what the code word was. It was Minutemen was the code word. And so she gave him the rifle then. And then he looked at it and he says, it's not even loaded. She said, well, I don't know what I was going to do if you hadn't come up with the code word. But anyway, that's how they met. And he kissed, according to some stories, he kissed her on the hand before they left, and she said, goodbye and good riddance. He said, I'll be back. So evidently he came back. And then after he left, she turned. She was at the house by herself, and she thought, he kissed me, only on the hand. But Dicey was, I think she was the 7th child, and she was only about 12 or 13 during the war, at the beginning of the war. And most of their family were loyalists, and Dicey was young and a girl, and so they didn't think she listened, but she listened a lot. And when she would go visit her relatives, she would find out things, and then she would tell her brothers. And she saved her father twice. She saved her older brother James once, and then she reported a lot of other goings on that was happening. Saved a whole town of people by finding out that the Bloody Scouts were going to come and kill everybody in the town. So she was able to do that, and in this picture, it shows a Englishman trying. They had told Solomon Langston was her father. They had told him a number of times to rein her in, because she was just a young girl, and they didn't want to do anything. So they felt that it was his responsibility to keep her tied to strict obedience, and so this was after she had gone and warned the people about the Bloody Scouts coming, and they came to kill him for not stopping her. And she jumped in front of the gun and said, "You'll have to shoot me first." Well, they won't shoot a young girl, so they just told him, said, "Well, you just better keep a better rein on her." And so they left. But she wasn't afraid of anything. In 1976, the DAR commemorated 24 or 25 patriot women for their part in the revolution. And Dicey was one of those. And I have the medallion. They're really hard to come by. Bonnie helped find this one on eBay, I think. And she got one for her patriot too. So, but I'm really proud to have that as my fourth great grandmother. Thomas and Dicey got married in January 9th, 1783. They were both 17. She was a few months older. Her birthday was in May, his was in July. So she was a couple of months older than Thomas, but they were both 17 at the time. She gave birth to 22 children. I have a lot of cousins out there. I mean, there's so many cousins. It's not, well, only 18 of them made it to adulthood. So even at 18, that's a lot of kids. And my line comes through Dicey was born in 1801, Springfield. But she had a son named James. He had a brother named Aaron. She had a brother named James. They both had a brother named Moses. And it just goes on and on. And then when I'm reading in Thomas's will, which I'm going to read you some excerpts from that a little bit, he has a daughter named Patsy. Well, there's no Patsy. But there's this Paley. Paley is a boy's name, though, I think. It's Martha, you think? Okay.
A lot of Marthas.
A lot of Marthas became Patsys. Okay, I didn't know that. So, are you learning something?
Look at that. Twins? How do you get Patsy from Martha?
Just lots of them. Yeah. The Springfield Langston farm was acquired as a land grant of 360 acres near Travelers Rest, South Carolina. And it was their partial payment for their participation in the American Revolution. I went to Travelers Rest and I saw what was left of parts of the farm. A lot of it has subdivisions on it, but it's right on the river, the Tiger River. I think it's Tiger. Because their mascot there at that high school is the tiger, so it must be the tiger. Anyway, the Springfield home was no longer standing, but there's a sketch of it there. Dicey died in 1837, and that's a picture of her headstone in Travelers Rest in the family cemetery. She was 71. And then Thomas marries a lady named Lavinia Smith. And Lavinia was from Virginia. And she's probably related to these Smiths. Because she's probably from the same county. Let's see if I can. From Lunenburg County, Virginia, wherever that is.
Bedford came from Lunenburg County.
Okay, well, see, there you go. We're probably cousins, aren't we? We're cousins. Yeah, I knew it. I just knew we had to be. Okay. But there's no details of, she died in 1842, but there's no I don't have any evidence of where she was buried. And then Thomas was buried next to Dicey in 1845 as Captain Thomas Springfield, and he was 79 when he died. I was doing a little research on their children. Their oldest, Aaron, lived to be 85. The rest of them died quite young, but Aaron lived to be 85. So longevity's in there somewhere, I'm hoping. Then we have a picture of the Springfield Langston Family Cemetery, which is in Travelers Rest. And I was there, but I didn't realize that that was just right down the road. But I was there by myself, and I didn't have anybody to go ask or anything. I was looking for the monument of Dicey's monument that the DAR had put up, and I found that, and I took a picture of that. But I didn't know the cemetery was just right down that same road. So when I go back, I'll make sure I get that. And then Dicey and Thomas are laid side by side, and the local DAR chapter takes care of that cemetery. They go in and clean it up and make sure everything's in proper working order and all that.
It's a hard thing back there where things grow.
Yeah, it's all green.
All right.
They have rain.
We did find a copy of the last will and testament of Thomas. Quite interesting. I know we're going a little over time, but I'm going to hurry. In the name of God, amen. Thomas Springfield of Greenville District and the state of South Carolina, being weak of body, but sound of mind and memory, thanks be to God for the same, do make this my last will and testament in manner and form, following, that is to say, first I recommend my soul to God who gave it to me, and my body to the dust, to be decently buried by the directions of my executors, who I shall hereafter name appoint. I thought that was quite interesting. To my son, Aaron, I leave $100. To my son, James, I give $10. My son, Hugh, I give $50.
Wow.
And he listed Hugh in here twice for $50. So I don't know if that was a misprint or did Hugh end up with $100. I don't know. My daughter, Patsy Magnus, I give her $100. My son, Thomas Springfield, I give a Negro boy named Adam and a large family Bible. My son, Bennett Springfield, all the woodland that lies on the south side of the road that runs from my house to Moon's. Moon's was the neighbors, not to the moon. The Moons were the neighbor's name. My daughter, Sarah Bates, a Negro girl named Jen. My daughter, Nancy Miller, I give 2/3 of the profit of a Negro woman named Liza, and at the decease of said Nancy Miller, this part of said Negro to be equally divided between Nancy Miller's 4 children. Mahala, Franklin, Henry, Thomas, and Jasper. So, my granddaughter, Sarah Springfield, who had become his caregiver, he gave her 100 acres of land, the plantation hereon I now live, and house, and I also give her 1 Negro boy named Good, also 1 feather bed, and all the furniture.
Wow.
But she took care of it. So that's why. My grandson, Pinckney Springfield, I give a certain parcel or tract of land bounded by my home tract and bounded by Lemon's land on the south and by Moon's land on the west. 70 acres more or less. And then my Negro George is to be sold, and all my loose property and stock and all kinds to be sold, and my debts paid out of these proceeds. And if there is any more money than pays my debts, I want it equally divided between my 3 grandchildren, Dicey, Harkins, and Nancy Harkins. So, And that was signed the 28th of October, 1843. And that's where we found that book. Any questions?
That was interesting, thank you.
Very good.
Very good.
Yes, I summed it up. And that's the truth.
Now you can see the variety in being able to find information about patriots. Very little about the service, at least for Thomas, but a great deal about his life. And so, how many of you know your patriot? If